אנחנו לומדים מספר תלמוד 10.
We are studying from the study of Sefirot, volume 1, part 4, page 218 in Hebrew.
אות ג' דברי הארי.
Item 3, the words of the Ari. And before we join Rabash, we will read a preparation excerpt, and then we'll read the source excerpt, and then we'll enter the study together.
אני הקלטתי את הרבש במשך כל השנים שהייתי.
As you know,
וההקלטות
I
האלה
recorded the Rabash over the many years that I was with him, and these recordings are in the archive.
הסבר על תלמוד 10 הספירות.
These are tapes with explanation from the study of the Sefirot, the preface, a few other articles, and even in the book of Zohar. There he did not add too many explanations, but in Tes he would explain more. I think it's worthwhile for us to listen to his lessons. Let's try. A little bit here, a little bit there. It brings a great deal of sanctity. Let's hope that also a great deal of impression. You'll also understand him a bit more. You'll feel him a bit more. Nevertheless, this is our teacher. Again, preparation excerpt from the words of Rav. As you know, I used to record Rabash over the years that I spent with him. And these recordings, you can find them in the archive. These are tapes containing explanations on Tes, the preface, a few other articles, even the book of Zohar. There, he did not explain much, but in Tes, he would explain more. I think that it's worthwhile for us to hear his lessons. We'll try here a little bit, there a little bit. It brings a great deal of sanctity. Let's hope that also a great deal of impression. You'll also understand him a bit more. You'll feel him a bit more. Nevertheless, he is our teacher. So we will read item 3 from the words of the Ari in volume 1, part 4, chapter 2, item 3, the words of the Ari.
כל אור עליון לתחתון ממנו הוא ביחס Av el ben.
Every upper light to its lower one is as the relation of a father to a son.
כי האורות העליונים
3.
הם
The reason is that the upper lights are to the lower lights as a father to his
אשר
sons.
תמיד להשפיע בהם.
He always wants to bestow upon them, as is explained regarding honoring the father and the mother.
נמשך אל
A
הבן.
single spark was extended from the father to the son and never moves from there.
וכן העניין בכאן.
Similarly, here in the 10 Sefirot, the upper ones leave some illumination in the first place called a record, or shimu, so that illumination would be drawn from there to the lower ones.
שוב, אות ג' דברי הארי.
Again, item 3, the words of the Ari.
לתחתון ממנו
Every upper light to its lower one is as the relation of a father to a son.
כי האורות העליונים
The reason is that the upper lights are to the lower lights as a father to his sons. He always wants to bestow upon them,
כמבואר
as is explained regarding honoring the father and the mother. A single spark is extended from the father to the son and never moves from there.
וכן העניין בכאן בי'
Similarly, here in the 10 Sefirot,
מניחים במקום
the upper ones leave some illumination in the first place called a record,
כדי שמשם
Rishimo, so that illumination would be drawn from there to the lower one.
פירוש אור פנימי לאות ג'. אות ג'
Inner light, item 3,
רשימו.
explains a record.
וזה נוהג הן באור
This applies to both the light and the vessel.
בכללות
to the general and to the particular.
כי מן הרשימות אשר נכללות בטבור
The
של
Rosh
התפשטות הראשונה
Toch Sof of the second expansion of Ak, called Partzuf Ab of Ak,
נולד
were
ויצא
born and emerged from the records that were included in the taboo of the first expansion of Adam Kadmon
פרצוף
that ascended to its peh.
כמבואר לעיל. וכן בפרטות
It is the same in the particular,
הנשארת
since a record that remains in the vessel of Keter of the first expansion becomes a male in the vessel of Keter of the second expansion.
ומהרשימה הנשארת
And the record that remains in the vessel of Chokhmah of the first expansion
לכלי דזכר
becomes a vessel of a male in the vessel of Chokhmah of the second expansion. And from their coupling emerged the males in the rest of the Sefirot, as the Ari wrote in the Tree of Life. Also, the females of the second expansion are made of the records that remain of the four levels that emerged during the first departure, called sparks or letters. The incorporation The incorporation of Malchut in Zeir Anpin is made of the sparks that fell from the level of phase 3, namely Zeir Anpin, into the vessel of Malchut, namely phase 4. Afterwards, in the second expansion, when the light of Malchut clothes the vessel of Zeir Anpin, it finds there the vessel of Malchut that belongs to it. Thus, the force of the sparks that fell from the reflected light of the level of phase 2, which is Bina, caused the incorporation of Zeir Anpin in the vessel of Bina. Later on, in the second expansion, when the light of Zeir Anpin came and clothed in the vessel of Bina, it found its vessel there, and so on, similarly. Thus, all the phases in the lower Partzuf are extended only from the records that its upper Partzuf left. The Ari writes, the upper lights are to the lower lights as a father to his sons. It means that a lower Partzuf is extended from an upper Partzuf as a son from a father. In other words, it cascades from the self of the lights in its upper Partzuf by the records that remain in the vessels of the upper Partzuf from its lights. And the Ari writes, the upper ones leave some illumination in the first place, called a record, so that illumination would be drawn from there to the lower ones. And remember this in all the places, for this is the key to the cascading of the degrees by cause and effect, from the beginning of the line to the end of Asiyah. Let's connect to listen.
גם כאן יכולים את אחרת. מה אחרת?
We can learn differently from here also. How differently? I don't want to just bring questions in here. Also, from the records that remain from the four levels that emerged during the first departure, called sparks or letters, there from these sparks and letters, meaning from the records that come from the dots, the females of the second expansion are made. How? Because from the sparks that fell from level 3, which is Zeranpin, to the vessel of Malchut, which is phase 4, an incorporation of Malchut with Zeranpin is made. This means the light of Malchut creates an incorporation of Malchut with Zeranpin. Here it appears to be the opposite. You could understand that phase 3, called Zeranpin, fell to Malchut. Malchut became incorporated with Zeranpin. What does it say here? It's the opposite. There was an incorporation of Malchut with Zeranpin. Are you listening? You could interpret it in the following way. That through the sparks that fell from the level of phase 3, which is the level of Chokhmah, which is the phase of Zeranpin, to the vessel of Malchut, which is phase 4, an incorporation of Malchut in Zeranpin is done. Zeranpin of phase 4. I'm asking, what light was there? The light of Zeranpin is in the vessel of Zeranpin. Now that Malchut is there, meaning when phase 3, which is Malchut, when the coupling is made over phase 3, which is Malchut, she fell to Zeranpin of whose Zeranpin? Of the first expansion. So here the light of Zeranpin is no longer in the vessel of Zeranpin. Rather, what do we have now? The light of Malchut in Zeranpin. I would like to explain what does it mean. That phase 4 means that there every light is in its vessel. The light of Zeranpin is in the vessel of Zeranpin. The light of Malchut is in the vessel of Malchut. So if he says that Malchut, what is Malchut? That she is in phase 3 of Zeranpin, that the phase of Malchut phase into which Zeranpin? Into the first line. Again, what is the difference between Zeranpin on the level of the Te'amim, tastes, that were made from the light of Zeranpin in the vessel of Zeranpin? So, which Zeranpin I'm talking about? Zeranpin that belongs to the first line. When I say that the coupling was made in phase 3, there you have Malchut. This Malchut does not belong to the first line. It's the Malchut of the place of the coupling. It follows that this light of Malchut fell to what? To phase 4 in the vessel of Zeranpin. Zeranpin is called the light of Zeranpin in the vessel of Zeranpin. What do we have now? The light of Malchut in the vessel of Zeranpin. Okay. What is the difference between me saying Zeranpin of the level of phase 4 and Malchut, which is in phase 3, which is the level of Chokhmah, called Zeranpin? So we need to explain it as follows. Zeranpin of the level of phase 4 is called the light of Zeranpin in the vessel of Zeranpin, whereas Malchut, who is in the phase of Zeranpin, in the vessel of phase 3, this Malchut, what is it? It's the light of Malchut in which a coupling was made, not the light of Zeranpin that pertains to the first line. Now, that this Malchut of Zeranpin fell into Zeranpin in phase 4, it follows that in the vessel of Zeranpin, where there should be the light of Zeranpin, I now have the light of Malchut. So if you follow this order, it will be okay. Now look at one more stage. Also, by the force of the sparks that fell from the reflected light of the level of phase 2, or of phase 3, which is Binah. To which level did it fall there? It caused the incorporation of Zeranpin in the vessel of Binah. This will also be difficult, because what does he say later on? That later on, in the second expansion, when the light of Zeranpin came and clothed in the vessel of Binah. So we need to explain it as follows. When I say the light of the Ranpin in the vessel of Bina, it means that he is still thinking about phase 3, otherwise it would be difficult to explain. If I say the light of the Ranpin, it means that the coupling was made, what does he say? The coupling was made first in phase 2, which is the phase of Bina. So I should be saying the light of Bina in the vessel of Keter, and the light of the Ranpin in the vessel of Chokhmah, and the light of Malchut in the vessel of Bina. So where will I place the next light now? The reflected light from the level of phase 2, which is Bina, fell to where? Let's say the first level of the Te'amim. This caused the incorporation of the Ranpin in the vessel of Bina. Later on, in the second expansion, when the light of the Ranpin came and clothed in the vessel of Bina, that also seems wrong. Why is it wrong here? If I say the light of the Ranpin in the vessel of Bina, these are only two levels. The coarseness of phase 3 on top of the coarseness of phase 4. When he starts to explain here 2, 3, 4, we get confused already. So item 4. Item 4 above. It turns out that when the Keter ascends and departs, it leaves one record in its place, in its own vessel, to shine for the Chokhmah, which is below it, after it ascends and departs. After it ascended and departed, then an illumination, which was in the vessel of Keter, is extended to the light of Chokhmah from that record that the light of Keter left in its vessel. Although afterwards the light of Chokhmah will also ascend and depart to the emanator. So why should this illumination remain? Nevertheless, the record that remains in the vessel of Keter does not move from it, even after the light of Chokhmah ascended to the emanator. From here it follows that if you say that the record left by the light of Keter in the vessel of Keter was for the sake of Chokhmah, then when the light of Chokhmah departed, why is that record of Keter still needed in the vessel of the Keter? Nevertheless, we should ask, because from here it follows that we should distinguish between two discernments. One is the record that remains in the vessel of the Keter for the sake of the vessel, and he is certainly not interested. In whether the light of Chokhmah departed or did not depart. The second discernment is that you say that it needs to shine to the light of Chokhmah. So when the light of Chokhmah departed, why is it still needed? He doesn't speak about that. What does he say? Well, let's look inside. Even though later it will, even though the light of Chokhmah will also ascend and depart to the emanator, nevertheless, the record that remains in the vessel of Keter does not move from it, from the vessel of Keter, even after the light of Chokhmah ascended to the emanator. Let's see what he means by that. Inner light, item 4. What does it say above? That when the Keter ascends and departs, it leaves one record in its place, in its own vessel. So, inner light. We might ask, in item 9, he says that the existence of the vessel was made from this record. And here he says that there is a vessel even before the record, before the departure of the light. It remained that it remained in the vessel, that there is light in the vessel, and the light departs from the vessel, and the record remains in the vessel. And we learned, so when the light departs from the vessel, it leaves a record in the vessel, and there we learned that how is the vessel made from the record? When is the record? After the departure of the light. Is the question clear? Again, we might ask, he says in item 9 that the existence of the vessel was made from the record. And here he says that there is a vessel even before the record, before the departure of the light. So a vessel remained, in the vessel there is light, and the light departs from the vessel, and the record remains in the vessel. Then he says, the thing is that there are two kinds of vessels in each Parzuf, which are the vessels that are drawn or extended from the first look in the Malchut of Rosh. These are called, actually, Ta'amim of the Rosh. The Malchut expands by the force of the reflected light in her, which he raised from below upwards, and expands from her and within her into 10 Sefirot from above downward. They are considered the vessels of reception for the first expansion, called Rosh. Therefore, what are called vessels? The reflected light in the Guf are called vessels, as we always learn. There is another phase of vessels in the Parzuf, which are extended by the second look in Malchut. This is already considered the zivug of the nekudot, the dots, which causes the departure and return of that light to the emanator. Their records that remain after that departure become complete vessels. So what is the difference? There we learned as follows. When the light was shining inside the vessel, the light and the vessel were mixed with each other. This means that there is a vessel, but there is no distinction between the light and the vessel. Only from the time that it started to be refined, which is called the second look, when there was zivug on the face of nekudot, this refinement causes it to completely depart. When the light departs, what remains is the discernment of the vessel. It follows that by what is this discernment made, the discernment of the vessel, by it refining each time, refining and refining, that makes the vessel. It follows that indeed there was a vessel in the first expansion, in the phase of te'amim, of the tastes also, but there was no distinction of it. Why? Because of the light. When the light shines in the vessel, it's not considered that the vessel has a lack. He explains, what does it mean that they're mixed? He says that there is the same importance that there is in the light, exists also in the vessel. Without it, without the vessel, can it receive anything? Nothing. Therefore, there's no distinction of a vessel. There's no distinction that the vessel is lower than the light. But from the time that the light begins to be refined, when the light begins to depart, and then it completely departs, the question comes up: why did the light depart? The light could not remain in the vessel. The vessel becomes lower, inferior. then it is considered a discernment of the vessel, that the vessel is something that is lower, not like the light. So the light departs. Is that clear? I explained that the Rav, the Ari, when he speaks about the expansion of the light and its departure caused the existence of the vessel, here he says that the records that remain after the departure, become the vessel. This means that the records become the vessels. Now, a record, Rishimo, it's light. A record is not a vessel, and a vessel is a vessel, so it seems to be a contradiction. Either it's the records or it's the vessel. So I can give an allegory for that. When a person gets a descent, certainly there was an ascent before. So they say, what is this descent? Now it's apparent that he is a vessel. Earlier he thought he was already light, he was above. But in the descent, when we see that he is a vessel, he's not light, he's not flying up there. I see that there are many people who see that I have descents. Nobody feels that he has a descent. At the time that a record of the light remains. How good I'm doing now. But then he has a descent. But if he didn't have a record left, then he has no descent. Back to the text. All of these records of the second look, of the dots that start from phase 3, and we need to remember that too, Te'amim, tastes, is considered the level of the keter of the degree, and Nekudot, it's from Chokhmah and below. However, we always speak with respect to the highest phase. This is why he calls it Chokhmah, but usually we need to remember that Nekudot, there are the bottom 9. This is what he calls it. All these records of the second look are drawn to all the phases, meaning to its lower Partzuf. As it says below, and I explained, and this is what it says. What did we speak about there? There he said that we have two kinds of records that are left. From the Te'amim, we have the record of the clothing, or what we call the male light. From the Nekudot, we have left the coarseness, the female light. And we learned what is the difference between clothing and coarseness. In clothing, there's no expansion in the goof. There it's called vessels, but with the coarseness, we do have expansion in the goof, which is called vessels or letters. This is what it says here. All these records of the second look, called the Nekudot, the dots, that start from Chokhmah and below, that from these remains the record of the coarseness, are drawn to all the phases of its lower Partzuf. It says, all the upper lights are to the, with respect to the lower lights, as a father to his sons. It means that the lower Partzuf is extended from the upper Partzuf like a son from a father, meaning by the records that remain inside the vessels of the upper Partzuf from its lights. What's difficult for me is that here he says that all of these records of the second look. This means that, this implies that the first look of Te'amim, these are not passed on. But in the end, he says, by the records that remain. This implies that everything is passed on. So therefore we can explain that the second look, either it means also in the second look, or as I explained before, that what he means is that he wants to speak about the record of the coarseness. And this comes specifically from the second look, meaning from the first look, what remains is only the record of the clothing, and from that there is no expansion in the vessels. You can say it this way, you can say it both ways, but both of them are true. The Ari writes, the upper ones leave some illumination in the first place, called a record. So that illumination would be drawn from there to the lower ones. Remember this well, for it is the key for the cascading of the degrees by cause and consequence from the beginning of the line to the end of the Asiyah, where each lower one is caused by the records of its upper partsuf. What does he want to emphasize here? When he says that the upper ones leave in the first place some illumination called a record, that we understand. So that illumination would be drawn from there to the lower ones. So he explains there, what does it mean, illumination for the lower ones? That every lower one is built from those records that are left. He explains this is what it means, that the illumination for the lower ones. What does it say above? Then the illumination is extended to the light of Chokhmah, item 5, inner light. Afterwards, when Malchut rose to phase 3, meaning when Malchut was refined of phase 4, now there is a coupling over phase 3, which is called Nekudot. Since the point of restriction over 4 was made already, where 10 Sefirot emerge from there on the level of Chokhmah, it is impossible for this light to begin in the Sefirah of Chokhmah. It is so because any expansion of light must begin from the Keter. It therefore requires an illumination of the record of Keter by which the light becomes attached to and tied to its root. Here he's already telling us something new. This means there's another explanation here. There is another issue here. He said once that in spirituality there are 1,000 tastes, not just one taste or 2 or 3. So, what does he tell us here? Later on, when the light of Chokhmah shines, this means the level of Chokhmah or the level of Binah, everything has to begin from the Keter, from the root. Therefore, this record completes for him the Keter. Meaning, let's say with Binah, we need to say that in Binah there are 2 records, a record from Chokhmah and a record from the Keter. And by this he completes Binah, so it can be, it can have 10 Sefirot of Binah. In one place it says the following, and this is a bit confusing. What is a record that completes? So he says the following. Don't think that when we say that the light departs, it remains in its place. It says explicitly that it goes, rises higher and higher and higher, and we have many examples of that. The light does not depart. This is not corporeality. However, we cannot see it. If we see even a very small part of this light that we see is called a record. As an example, a record of the light. So a record, it's not that a record is one thing and a light is something else, but rather a very small part of that we see of this light is called a record. Indeed, it's the light itself. there is no departure of the light. However, departure means that we cannot see it. This is called a departure. This is a great rule, and we have to understand all of the things through that. Next. What did we agree on? In order for 10 Sefirot to exist in each one, the record completes it so that it would have 10 Sefirot. Moving on. Likewise, when Malchut rose to Binah, it was refined, and it has a screen of phase 2, so it's no longer extended that I'm more than the level of Binah. 10 Sefirot, what remains there, where? In the level of Binah, necessarily an illumination of Chokhmah, so that it would be 10 Sefirot. And it is likewise for the above mentioned reason that any expansion of light must begin from the Keter. Remember this in every place, for it is impossible for any degree to lack the upper Sefirot altogether. Rather, when the upper Sefirot are regarded as mere illumination of a record, then we say that they're absent there. Why? For they do not shine there as they should be shining. Rather, there's only a small part. We are not talking about the light at all.
Why? Why do we know what is in the light? What are we talking about? The vessel itself, or we speak of the light, meaning how the vessel is impressed by the light. Sometimes we speak of the vessel itself, how do we make a vessel, and later the vessel receives the light, how it's impressed by the light. Therefore we say every vessel that receives light must begin from Keter. That is why when we learn in the world of Atzilut, in the world of correction, that we need to correct the shattering of the vessels that took place in the 7 kings, he asks why the world of Atzilut has to come out. Keter, Chokhmah, Binah would have been enough to have Zampin come out by itself. He wants to explain the words of the Ari. The Ari says that there, in the world of Nekudim, there were 7 kings, who are Zeranpin of Nekudim. And later the Ari says that the 8th king came out called Dat, which is Zeranpin. So he asks why the Ari skips Keter, Chokhmah, Binah of Atzilut, which are Atik, Arechanpin, and Abba Ve'ima of Atzilut, but he thinks only the 7 kings of the shattering. And he brings evidence from the verse that the king of that is the 8th king, which is the world of correction, which is Zeranpin. There in Inner Light, he explains, the Ari wants to let us know that you don't need to correct more than Zeranpin, which was the shattering. In that case, why did Atik, Arechanpin, and Abba Ve'ima called here the degree of Keter, Keter of Ma, and Chokhmah of Ma, which is Arechanpin, and Bina of Ma, which is Abba Ve'ima, since nothing starts from halfway. It starts in the Keter. However, in the world of Ak, Keter, Chokhmah, Bina came out by themselves. So their own quality will be there. Whereas in the world of Atzilut, when Atik, Arichanpin, and Abba Veima came out, which are the degree of Keter, Chochmah, Binah, of Ma, not for their own sake, rather, as far as it's concerned, it's considered like above tabu of Ak. There is Chochmah of direct light. They have even the first restriction there. And when we speak of the second restriction in the Patzufim of Gar of Atzilut, there we also learn about the second restriction and the illumination of Chochmah. They come to bestow to Zon, and there we speak of how they bestow to Zon, not about their own value themselves. But there is a rule that nothing begins in the middle, everything comes from Keter, whether it's the lights, whether it's the vessels. The lights we don't speak of. The light, I'm talking about how the vessel is impressed by the light. It comes from the root, from the Keter. Now we have to start item 5. Afterwards, when Chochmah rises to the emanator, she leaves a record in his vessel to shine from him to Bina after he himself departs. Even after Bina rises to the emanator, the record of Chochmah does not leave the vessel of Chochmah. Since if we say that Chochmah needs to leave a record for Bina, but when Bina also departs, why then do I need the record of Chochmah everywhere? He says, it doesn't depart. Likewise, all of them until the Yesod. We learned in item 5, he explained to us below what I'm saying, that the records remain to illuminate what is below it, is since I need 10 Sefirot to be there. When Bina illuminates, or when Chesed illuminates, or shines, when something is already lacking from that point above it. When I say that the lights leave records and the records shine, then the records complete the 10 Sefirot. You find that when the Chesed shines, Chochmah needs to leave its records. Not for Bina now, but for Yesod, for Chesed, later for Hod, up to Yesod, down to Yesod. Whereas Malchut does not leave a record. Why? It says, item 6, inner light, however, when the light of Malchut departs, she does not leave a record in her vessel. Why? For there is no Sefirah beneath her to receive from her, to complete it into 10 Sefirot. And although there will be other worlds beneath her, below the Malchut, in that case, let's say that these records will complete some. Will also be complete in the previous degree. No. There's no. It is not their kind, and she has no adhesion with them, as there is adhesion with the 10 Sefirot of each and every world in and of itself. Below, we explain that we need when a Parzuf of Galgalta comes out, that there need to be there 10 Sefirot. But here he wants to say that I don't have to say that in the Parzuf of Abiyah, the Parzuf of Galgalta will also shine completely. That's the explanation that he gives. Let's see item 6, inner light. But the light of Malchut, when it departs, he says, he doesn't leave a record in her vessel. Why? He says, because it is female, Malchut is called a female light, receiving for herself and not bestowing. Because of it, her 10 Sefirot and the degree. What is the meaning? And down to here. Why don't we say that Malchut does not receive? How can it continue? This is the meaning of reflected light. Therefore, she does not leave a record. Why? Since there's no record, only the remains of the expansion of direct light that remains there. As the Ari says, there is no cessation in the upper light here. For the lower one is completely dependent on the upper one. But the upper one does not need the lower one. So what does he want? What is the meaning of she receives for herself and does not bestow? She receives for herself. Why does she receive for herself? Why doesn't she bestow? I'm asking. So it's good to learn it simply. She receives what she is given and she doesn't bestow. She herself does not extend. She says, I don't want to receive. And by not wanting to receive, she has a certain illumination, but not direct light. And what we say direct light, we mean actual light. In that case, we say that the record has to complete the light, but cannot complete anything. It's not light, it's only a force of rejection. That's what he says here. He explains that Malchut is a female light that receives for herself what she is given, and she does not bestow, meaning she does not extend for herself. Why? There was a restriction of on its own quality. We have to remember that all the qualities of the Sefirot speak of the 4 phases of direct light. Malchut is called receiving in order to receive. And after the restriction, what does she say? I do not want to receive. No, we're going to put an end to this, create an ending. Because what is the force of Malchut? What is in Malchut? It's only reflected light, as we know. She creates a screen, and the reflected light comes out, and therefore she does not leave a record. All the records are to complete the lights. Since there is no record, rather there remains from the expansion of direct light there, in order to complete 10 Sefirot, as the 10 lights, as the Ari says above. That's clear, I think. And also there is no cessation in the upper light. If Malchut doesn't receive, let's say it lacks 1 Sefirah, because the lower one is completely dependent on the upper one to complete it, but the upper one does not need the lower one to have anything from it. Again, what we speak of now the records, I need the light, the direct light, to complete 10 lights. Therefore, the record that completes the light is like the light itself. Malchut does not leave a record, he says. She never had a direct light to have a record from. If so, I'm asking a question. Why are you saying that Malchut never had this light, therefore she doesn't leave? We learned that the last phase loses. What does it mean, loses? Meaning she had it. Lost, it means she had it. But she didn't have it. It's lost. What is lost? How can you lose something you never had? Here you say she has. Here you say she doesn't have. So you say she's lost. If she had, we speak about the power of overcoming of the screen. She lost that power. Whereas if she never had it, I make a discernment. I make 4 discernments. 1, Malchut of direct light, where each time is called Malchut is receiving in order to receive. 2, we speak of Malchut that has screen. So I'm speaking about her screen. 3, I have to speak of the kind of light Malchut has. If she doesn't receive, she gives reflected light. She gives a screen, reflected light by itself, no more. Also, we have the degree of Malchut. That's already a different thing, completely. In the degree of Malchut, it says that Yesod leaves Reshimo for Malchut, meaning Malchut will also have 10 Sefirot. Here I have to say, it speaks of the degree of Malchut. And when I'm saying the degree of Malchut, there is light, direct light and reflected light. I have to say how we will see it later, or I say that this individual Malchut of direct light that has all each and every degree. What is 7? He's asking. Because even though she will have additional worlds beneath Malchut, it's not of the same kind of her, and she doesn't have adhesion with him, as there is adhesion of the 10 Sefirot. Because they come, number 7, because they come in a renewed form of coarseness. This is the coarseness of phase 4, and in phase 4 we learned there are 10 Sefirot, even though there is additional other coarseness of level 3. There's no connection there. Therefore he says she has no adhesion with them. What does it mean? It means that adhesion means equivalence of form, while separation and difference means disparity of